I came to the UK in 1989 because I was leaving the Philippines because I was arrested because of my trade union work in the Philippines. The Filipinos, especially the nurses and the Filipino migrants came to the UK, I suppose, and also to different parts of the world because the Philippine government has a very aggressive and very strong policy in terms of exporting labor. The biggest export in the Philippines are migrants, and it's the highest foreign exchange earner in the UK. So many governments in the UK, successive governments, have realized that it's really a good money-making business to export workers out of the Philippines. And therefore, many industries have proliferated in the Philippines with a specific view of training workers to be sent out of the Philippines. And that's been going on since probably as early as the 50s, 60s. And the Filipino nurses, or what they call then auxiliary nurses, have come to the UK in the probably 60s, early 60s, and more, and continuously on since then. But of course, they are usually called auxiliary nurses, and then they have to be trained to become nurses. The UK really needed nurses badly. I think that they, from year 2000, even before, they have been struggling to get local British nurses to train and work as nurses in the UK. So the NHS very specifically recruited and set up kind of agencies or work with different agencies to recruit target nurses from the Philippines. And because I think the reason for that is that the Philippines is basically very highly trained workers, the Filipino nurses. They are trained for 5 years, and their nursing is a nursing degree, a bachelor's degree. And of course, the fact that they are already trained to be brought to the UK, it costs very little for the NHS and the UK government to bring in already trained nurses because they didn't have to pay for their training. And of course, from the Philippine side, the Philippine industry in terms of sending nurses, like training them, proliferated. There's hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of training schools for nurses in the Philippines, and then of course agencies recruiting and ensuring that they get sent to the UK and of course to other countries for nurses. There's a big demand. I have to say it's more fueled by demand rather than supply, because the demand created the supply, because the Philippines know that the UK will demand nurses continuously. So they upped the kind of industry and made sure that there will be supply of nurses going to the UK. Kanlungan was set more than 25 years ago. It was actually established by Filipino migrant women. Some of them are health workers working in the NHS, because actually of the kind of racism that we experience as a community, which is surprisingly, of course, not surprisingly maybe, but a continuing kind of issue that we were experiencing as a community in the UK. So we felt that there's a need to have an organization that will support workers. Of course, we kind of translate it as kind of employment rights issue, where nurses and healthcare workers are feeling really, we call it bullying in workplaces. But also as a community, we felt that we've been completely invisibilized, meaning we're not visible in the British society, despite the fact that we're working as nurses and healthcare workers in hospitals and care homes. So, and the fact that we, try to do the work that we come to do here in order to be able to support families back home. That's really the kind of main push for many nurses to come to the UK, is to support family back home. And Kanlungan realized that there's a growing number of workers, Philippine workers, coming to the UK, and a lot of issues are coming up from the kind of work experiences they have, but also experiences in the communities, building our communities and integrating and working in the British society. So yeah, we set it up so that we can address the kind of exploitation that we were experiencing in the workplaces, the abuse, and it took us a bit of time to, call it some of those experiences as racism and discrimination. And also, of course, it took us a bit of time to analyze that, in fact, it's institutional racism within the kind of system that the Filipinos were brought to the UK. It started from there until, to the very the kind of situations where we work in. It starts from the beginning for when they are being recruited. The fact that the UK recruit nurses from the Philippines through a system of an immigration system that overshadows any kind of rights of workers, of migrant workers. So they have to go through a system where it says, we want you to work as nurses, but we don't recognize your nursing degree. We need you to, one, train first on the first probably 6 months of your working in the UK. We want you to pass the test before you can get your NMC registration, and we will pay you less than the nurses who are working alongside with you, even though you have the qualification of a nurse in the UK, much higher probably than the qualification of the British nurses here. And even though you have already experienced more than 2 to 3 years working as a nurse in your country of origin. And then on top of that, we want you to satisfy all the kind of immigration requirements that really is there to say to the worker, to the person, that you're not really somebody that we want to be here, but you're just here to work, right? And if you don't satisfy the work that you're doing, we can kick you out anytime. So that's the kind of environment that many of the nurses come into the UK feeling already, not valued, if you like, and already feeling to a degree undervalued by the system that allows that. And the cost of it is just tremendous. I mean, the cost of coming to the UK, starting from back in the Philippines, where they have to pass an English test first, and then they have to pass an online test, and then they have to pass an interview, and then they have to go through the immigration process, the interview, and then all of those things cost money, right? And then once that's done, when they're here, then they have to go through the same kind of training, testing, going through immigration thing, and so on. So that journey from applying to the journey of being here, probably a journey of about 12 months, sometimes 24 months, cost a lot of money before they can even be given the NMC registration to practice as a nurse. So it puts a lot of pressure on the nurses and in terms of their mental health, their physical health, and how they view the world around them. For them, from their point of view, I just have to work to make sure that I get all these requirements, and then when I pass the test, I can be a nurse. But then it doesn't stop their journey, because then they have to renew their visa, which costs a lot of money. Nowadays, we have to pay their immigration health surcharges, which is ridiculous, because they're the ones providing health services to something that they cannot access without paying it. So all those things really makes you feel like, look, I'm a nurse. Why do I have to go through all of these things, right? So it just is very, very institutionally put into place so that people feel that they are nothing in this world except a worker, which they can bring in and bring out if they want to. So I work in the unions, and I've been really working closely alongside the workers, and at the same time, I am a trustee of Kanlungan and have been kind of overseeing a lot of the work that the charity has been doing. And there are many cases of workers who is like unbelievable kind of experience that you think really it shouldn't happen, but it's happening. And yeah, I mean, you know, we're all human beings. It affects us because the feeling of injustice and the feeling of questioning why does it happen to be like that. So I know of a nurse who had terrible mental health problems and also have been trying to ask for support from the employer. And what baffles me is that working in the NHS, why they couldn't, you know, diagnose their own employees of mental health problems or, you know, issues in terms of their ability to cope with the stresses of the work, and that, you know, they end up taking their own life because of the inability to cope in that situation. And yeah, I mean, seeing all those things happening and people suffering and people, you know, tragically sometimes lose their lives, that's really, really difficult for us. And well, you know, we try to support our community and support the people who support the others. And of course, that's a process that strengthens us a little bit and make us understand that there has to be a more fundamental approach to addressing those issues, apart from, which is also important, the kind of case by case, going to the grinding, you know, putting grievance against the employer, helping them write the letters, you know, helping them understand why things were happening to them, going through the kind of whatever procedural things that they have to go through, at the same time knowing that this person is, you know, being affected physically and mentally. So I think it takes quite a lot of strength and energy and resources from the community. And as an organization, Kandungan has very little resources. You know, we're just a small organization. We've got quite a large number of volunteers, but nevertheless, still the resources is not enough to be able to cope with the demand of the things that we have to address as part of the community experiences. One of the nurses told me once that she went to one of the patients, and the patient told her, "I don't want you here. I want a British nurse." And she said, "Okay, sir, I'm going to find out if I can find you a British nurse." And she went and to probably to her manager. And then she went back to the patient and said, "I was told that the next British nurse who will be on duty in this ward with you will be 5 months from now. Would you like to wait for that, sir?" And, you know, that's the kind of subtleties that they get from patients initially. But from colleagues, from managers, because Filipino nurses will not normally work on their own in wards. There will be a few of them. So when they go on break and they go to the nurses' room, they will talk in Filipino, yeah? And then white colleague, their manager will come in and say, "You cannot speak Filipino here. You cannot speak in your language here. It's not allowed." So, you know, they're on their break, right? So, and of course, we always talk in our language every time we see each other in places where we know we can do. They're very conscious of the fact that they cannot do that with their patients. But there are some patients who will speak to them in Filipino because they're also Filipino patients. And also they're being told off. You know, they're told, "You can't do that, you can't speak to them." But in some circumstances, which is a bit more straightforward racism, is, you know, when a Filipino nurse is told, "Oh, you speak very good English. I didn't know that you can speak very good English. So it's like, how do you take that? How do you take that? But in many circumstances, I think, they feel that when pressure is put upon the ward where they're working, a lot of this pressure are put upon them more than other colleagues who are not white. So they feel that they will target Filipino nurses and put that pressure upon them. Racism is accepted because not many people who are the recipient of racist experiences are calling it out, because it's so difficult. I mean, if you're a nurse coming from the Philippines, you haven't experienced racism in the Philippines because you're working with Filipinos. You may experience a bully manager, but not racism. You come to the UK, you think, that manager is just bully. He's just talking about how smelly my food is, right? Or, that kind of thing. But because we haven't really kind of processed the system of racism and discrimination in the UK, which is very much embedded into the institution, it's very difficult for us to call it out and to articulate it. And I think that's being taken advantage of by the whole system, and that they continue to perpetrate it because of that. During the pandemic, the NHS was put a lot under pressure, and in the process also, the managers put a lot of pressure on their workers, right? I mean, it's natural kind of things. So when they put a lot of pressure on their workers, of course, some of the workers will push back, right? Because there is a certain limit to what they can do and how they'll be able to do it. But many of the Filipino workers didn't push back to a degree. They took it and they accepted that they have to work, and they have to work even though knowing that they are probably being made to work without proper protection from the pandemic, from the virus that's affecting a lot of people. And it's probably because many of them, and all of us, have not experienced this kind of thing before and didn't know what to do. But also the fact that there has been a continuing kind of institutionalized acceptance of the fact that when we're told to do some work, we have to do work, yeah? And we don't question it because our primary goal is to save the patient, or to make sure that the patient is well looked after. So I think that's the kind of thinking that many of our health workers have had that at the time. And of course, by the mere fact that they probably also they haven't been really trained to question some of the things that they're being asked to do, or to do things in places where probably they need more protection to be able to do those work. I mean, they were telling me, and it already, they've put plastic bags and, plastic aprons and things like that to go to the patients with COVID during the beginning of the pandemic. And even though they're feeling really nervous doing that, they did it. They did it. And slowly they're realizing, some of their colleagues who are a bit more articulate than they are, saying, I'm not going to go there. Whilst then, of course, they're being asked by the manager, you have to go there. But others say, they're not going to go there. But I think in the process, many of the Filipino workers did go and do the work that they have done. Because when I spoke even to some who had been affected by COVID and recuperating from home, they said that almost every other day, their manager will call them, how are you? Are you well enough to come to work? Even though they know that they have COVID. And they said, oh, you've been off 10 days now. You can come back to work if you don't have any more fever. Just come back to work. And they will go back to work because they feel that they have to go back to work. And many of those, especially the ones who are under limited leave to remain, their visa is still precarious, feel that they will have to work because they don't want to lose their jobs. Because if refusing to lose their job, they always tell me they will kick me out of my job. I will lose my job, and then I will lose the right to stay in the UK. And that's what's the kind of thinking, the kind of fear they have, and they will work then. So even though we say to them, if you're ill, you're ill, you shouldn't go back to work. But they said, every other day my manager is calling me to say, you have to come back to work if you don't have any more fever. You know, they're kind of being well is not having fever. That's how they were always asked, do you still have fever? They said, no, I don't have any more fever. Then you're well, back to work. You have to come back to work. So even though they're feeling still, not well in themselves. So that's the pressure on them, the fact that they don't want to lose their job because they know their family back home are also experiencing the same kind of pandemic experiences and threat to their lives, and that many of them have to send back money home because some of the family members have lost their jobs too because of the lockdown in the Philippines. And so there's that compelling thing. We take our responsibility quite really seriously and strongly in the community. We never stop sending money back home. Even I continue to send money back home to family members, to extended family members, to whoever needs money back home in the Philippines. And so that's like, it's our, responsibility. We take this responsibility very strongly, and we fear losing jobs. That's why the unemployment in the Filipino community is very low, because we do the job and we do it wherever. If the nurses cannot be nurses, and I've spoken to a few nurses who didn't pass their test to become nurses, they will stay and find other work, even though as domestic workers or as live-in home carer, they will stay and do their work, even though they haven't got the right to work anymore, because they cannot go back because one, they haven't paid the loans that they owed in the country back home, and second, they cannot face the family saying, I failed and I cannot support you. So they carry on doing it. And I see a lot of nurses who are carers, live-in carers as undocumented workers, because they didn't pass the test that they had to pass. Not because they didn't understand what they're going through, but a test is a test, It puts a lot of pressure on you to pass whatever test you have to take. So it's really a waste of time, but the whole pandemic have pressured the community to work, probably because of a strong sense of duty, a strong sense of responsibility to the family, but also not having the tools and the ability to question these things, because we always feel that we're a foreigner here in the UK, and that they can kick us out anytime they want to kick us out, despite the fact that maybe some of them will have indefinite leave to remain, or even maybe citizenship. We still have that kind of thinking. We're temporary here, and they can do whatever because of the changes in the government immigration policies over how many years. They change almost every year. I think it's probably one of the department in the UK that has the largest number of change in policies in order to make sure that there's a kind of hostile environment against migrants in the UK. And that is ingrained in our mentality, that anytime they can kick us out. The death in our community because of the COVID pandemic is very high in comparison to the percentage of Filipino workers in the NHS. We took about 25% of the death in the NHS workforce, well, so probably only about 1.5% of the total NHS workforce. So it's really disproportionate. The families members who've come to us after their family member died are completely devastated because of what happened, and completely lost. And some of them also lost in the sense that some of them don't even have the right to stay in the UK. So when their family member, like a nurse, passed away, the family member who is here technically will have to leave the country. So because they haven't got the indefinite leave to remain. So those are the kind of many compounding kind of problems that we were facing, supporting the community. And it's very difficult because the loss, the bereavement, is not only with the family, but with the whole community and the community that's supporting them. And I started to feel that even many of our staff members were feeling really, bereaved and kind of depressed with what's happening in our community. But I think that the process of going through and understanding on what to do, which is what we try to help them to go through, to understand, why the body is not being released, how long they will keep the body, why the body has to be cremated, why they cannot even see the body of their loved ones who pass away. These are the kind of things that, from our point of view, we can't understand. I mean, the Filipinos would normally hold like 2 weeks wake when somebody passed away in our community. It's a Catholic, mainly Catholic country, and that's the kind of tradition we have. The fact that somebody has been taken away without even, seeing the family member who had been ill, who had been taken in isolation, in intubation and all that, that's really, really difficult for many of our members in the community who've been affected by this death. We had to go through the process ourselves. It's also a learning curve for us to understand all these things and to be able to explain it to our community members so that they can understand it also and what they have to go through in the process. But also the biggest impact is that financially, even the nurses haven't got enough money. The family members have not enough money to pay for whatever needs to be paid. It costs a lot of money to do cremation and to bury the dead. They always ask, can we bring the body back home to the Philippines, which is something that at that time we know will never be allowed there. And then we have to navigate the issue between the employers and then, of course, the question to the Philippine embassy on what kind of support they can do to the family and negotiate all that with the family. And then at the same time, trying to raise money for them with the family to be able to cope with the financial strain on the requirement for going through the process of grieving and the process of, looking after the body. And that's a lot of strain on many of the family members. And there's also a lot of anger from the family members because that's when they started to tell us what other family members before they died told them what was happening in the workplaces. They're sharing to them how, they have been forced sometimes to go to specific area of work that they didn't have enough protection and that they had to work like sometimes 24 hours during the height of the pandemic without any rest in order to be able to cope with the demand of the work. And that they come home really completely exhausted and, not even able to look after themselves when they're home. So all of those things were being fed back to us by the family members who are left by the nurses and health workers that passed away. But I think what was really coming out from there is that there seem to be different stories, different stories of why people died. Like one story I was told by the nurse whose husband died, who's a care worker and healthcare assistant in the hospital, the same place where she was working, is that her husband whilst on intubation, was moved from that hospital where they were working to another hospital without telling her, because she had COVID and she was isolating from home, but they didn't even call her. And they moved her husband from that hospital to another hospital while he was in intubation. And they didn't tell her. And then, of course, the husband died. And she questioned them, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you do that? And she couldn't get the right answer from them. And the only answer that they should get is that they needed a bed. So that was really unacceptable. For somebody, she said, my husband worked there, I work there in that hospital. Why will you remove my husband from that bed in order to give it to another person? Those are a lot of questions like that haven't received any answer, you know. So we helped her write a letter inquiring about the reasons why it happened. And she never got the proper response. She got, of course, the PR people from the hospital. They have PR people in the hospital who talks to family members to try to, you know, do their usual kind of PR work with family members. So though, you know, many different kind of stories like that, which is difficult to accept really. And one of my close friends, who is a nurse, who died, you know, she was taken to the hospital because she already had pre-existing condition. And her family, two days after, the hospital brought her back home and said to the family members, we don't have enough oxygen and we don't have enough bed. We need her bed, so we're bringing her home. Of course, she died the following day after that. So again, we have to help them write, you know, letters asking why they made those kinds of decisions from the hospital. But they will get the PR response to those kinds of questions. So it's very, very difficult because some of the people I know died because in the process of our work we get to know many of these workers. And we never really get the right response to these questions. Why and who determines who will die and who will not die? Because of the kind of health service they're being given or not being given. My friend Louisa, yes, she passed away January. She worked for maybe more than 20 years in the NHS as a nurse. She brought up 2 children on her own as a single mother in the UK. It's part of migration. Family breaks apart, so her relationship with her husband fell apart. She managed to bring her 2 children here because it costs a lot of money to go home regularly. They probably will go home maybe once or twice every 3 years. She brought up her 2 children on her own as a nurse. She's very active in our community. That's why she's close to us, because she's part of Kandungan. And she started to have problems. Even the NHS didn't manage to diagnose her properly. She started to have signs of motor neuron disease last year. And then when they finally diagnosed her, they told her that she cannot work anymore as a nurse, which was devastating for her. But she lasted only a very short time. She could have lasted longer than a few months, but she got COVID. It's typical. She lived in a overcrowded accommodation because she has her children, and then one of her child got married, so the partner lived there, and then she's got grandchildren live in the house in a very small, house in East London, and it's overcrowded. Her children also works frontline worker, went in and out, got COVID, infected the whole family, infected her. She's already vulnerable, and that's what happened. Took her to the hospital. The hospital said, we need her bed. We don't have any more oxygen. Here she goes, back to the house. She died. And that was terrible. It was really terrible. And she could have lived longer. I don't know why they make decisions on who should live and who should die. But yeah. I think, personally, it's an insult. 60,000 is not the payment of a family member's life. And it's an insult. Many of the family members felt that it's an insult, but of course they needed money. They needed money to be able to tie them over through the difficulty of losing somebody. And also, not knowing how they can cope financially, because with nurses, normally they will have their partner working as care workers also in the hospital or in a care home. So they're in kind of low-paid type of work, and they need income to be able to support the family household in the UK and back home in the Philippines. So losing one, earner, it really puts them in a kind of almost below the breadline, if you like. I mean, going through the process of claiming the 60K is also another ordeal for them. All the kind of paperwork they have to complete, and then they have to wait to wait for the certificate that the worker died from COVID, right? And sometimes it's a tricky question, because some of them will die from heart attack or something because they were experiencing breathlessness and so on and so forth. So they have to wait for the process of, determination that they died from COVID. But some of them would die because of exhaustion from the work, and got really very ill. I know one of the nurses who died, she had cancer, but she was still, made to work in COVID risk area, and she had cancer. She was being treated for cancer. And of course, her immune system is very low, and she died from COVID. But she would have survived if they had not put her, at risk from dying from getting the infection. But 60,000 is really, we felt, many people in the health services felt it's an insult. They're very angry by the fact that they only value the 60,000 as kind of value for the life of these workers. There should have been a little bit more thinking about it, rather than just, here's 60,000, go away, kind of thing, to family members. It's like, 60,000 and shut you off, basically. There should have been other thinking around that, like kind of a pension for life for family members, on a reasonable level and arrangement. They had to go through trying to find a way how to claim anything from the NHS pension for the family member who died and who had been doing that. And the NHS pension has a lot of restriction on it, because it was set up without thinking about COVID situation when you die with it. So like the 60K is a replacement for that kind of thing. But going through that process of trying to claim whatever they can claim takes a lot of toll on family members who probably, some of them are also have COVID and maybe suffering from COVID and then suffering from bereavement, and then having to go through this paperwork that they have to go through administratively. It normally takes about 3 to 6 months at least before they could claim that. Whilst at the moment, they need to pay for the 5,000K to bury or to cremate their family. Why do you get that? So we still have to, support them fundraising just to be able to. They have to borrow money. This nurse, I told you, her husband was taken away. She had to borrow money in order to pay for her husband's cremation because she couldn't get the money immediately from the 60K supposed to be. But it needs to be done immediately or soon enough, and she didn't have that money. at the time her husband needs to be cremated, and many of those family members. The most difficult thing are the ones who are here on their own without family members, because it's only families from the Philippines who are trying to cope with the death and then trying to cope with the bureaucracy here in the UK, which have no clue at all about how, in God's name, will they know which papers to complete, which documents to send to the employer, to the government, in order to get anything from the government. At the same time, who's going to look after the cremation of the person, the family member who died in the UK? They will have to rely on friends, on the community organization to support them to go through that process. And that's really difficult. That's so difficult that, they haven't seen the family member for a long time, and now suddenly the person is dead, and they haven't even seen them, and then they have to go for a long distance, restricted COVID situation, trying to get the ashes of their family members. And that's really a lot of strain on your mental health, on your physical health, and also impoverish many people at that time, because they have to borrow money to go through this process, because the money is not just there. Here it goes, you take the money because you need it now. No, you have to pay. Do all this paperwork, present all these documents, get the death certificate. It's COVID. Oh, yes, it's COVID. Okay, and then, that takes a long time, and that's really difficult. Even us supporting them, going through that, we find it really difficult and very bureaucratic. The Filipinos are afraid to speak out because of the way in which we were brought here, through a system that inculcates fear on many migrants. It's the whole hostilities and the whole kind of process which says, you owe us a lot of things, and therefore you behave and you do what we told you to do in order to be able to stay here. So many workers would say, oh, I'm so grateful that I managed to get a job here in the UK. I keep on saying to them, no, they should be grateful to you, because you're giving your labor, your skills and your knowledge into the UK, which never even paid for your training at all, But of course, the thinking is like that they owe the UK because they were given jobs here, and that they fear that if they speak out and say anything against the situations and the experiences they have, that they will be removed from the country. The fact that, day in, day out, they hear things against migrants, against, people coming to the UK, about how the fact that they always put in the media how we only come here because we want to take advantage of the whole benefit system in the UK, which is laughable, because there are hardly many Filipinos I know who are on benefits. Even when they reach the age of 65, when they retire, they hardly have anything except whatever pension they got from the NHS. So I think that the whole hostile environment of the immigration system that supersedes any kind of employment rights and human rights of migrants like the Filipinos really affects us. It affects us to the point that sometimes it immobilizes us and put a lot of fear in our head, because we sometimes don't even want to say that to our family back home, that this is our situation, that we fear we might be kicked out, because it's also inconceivable, from families back home to think, why will they kick you out? But, it's still the complicated scenario of tripping off on the kind of immigration requirements that you need to do. So if your employer forgot or was delayed in renewing your visa, you're working there, your employer is supposed to renew your visa or support you in renewing your visa. Sometimes they don't even support you. They just say, oh, do whatever you need to do, and then you get it on yourself. But sometimes when they are delayed in doing that, and you get, punished by the government because of that delay, and then you fear that they will remove you from the country because you've lost your visa whilst you're still working. It puts a lot of strain on you, the mental health that puts upon the people about what do I do now? I mean, it's my employer's fault. They didn't put it right on time. They said they will do it, they will put all the paperwork in time, and they didn't. And now, I'm being told that you've lost your visa because you didn't put it right on time. The deadlines of all these things is just so rigid. They will not even allow you to go one hour before the deadline of your visa submission, and all the paperwork that you have to put together to be able to do that. And then you made a mistake. You make a mistake in one document that you put there, and it sets you back, and you have to repeat it again, and so on and so forth. It's just so, I think, grueling experience for many of our workers. And the fact that it costs money also. It costs money. I mean, a visa will cost $1,500 to renew. And then the IHS, well, supposed to be now there's no IHS, but, before the immigration health surcharge, and then all the paperwork that you have to put in there, and then, and so on and so forth. So sometimes I know some nurses, they will put in their application for visa, but not their children, because they couldn't afford it. So then I say, so what happened to your children? Well, they don't have visa for now until I can save enough money to apply for their visa. So it's ridiculous, right? So it's really ridiculous because they cannot afford it. How much does a nurse earn? $25K to start with. Well, not even $25K when they come in. It's less than that. So it's a lot of strain on them, and the fear of losing their job after spending so much money to get it is just, terrible on many of our workers. They cannot conceive losing their job, so they'll do anything. They'll do anything. In an ideal world, the changes that would really help this process of nurses coming to the UK is to get rid of all these hostile policies against, migrants like nurses. They should apply to a job like anybody who's applying for a job in the UK. You apply for a job, these are my qualifications, you interview me, you think that I'm okay for the job, you offer me the job, and I go and work and get paid properly. And that this whole migration link to visa and to your employer should be removed. Because really, if you abuse me as an employer and you're holding my visa, I cannot say anything against you because I'm sure you will withdraw my visa, right? So it allows the employer to a degree the authority or the right to exploit workers, because on the one hand it's saying, yeah, this worker, when they leave your employer or you dismiss them, you can get rid of them, and they have to leave the country. So that means I'm almost kind of enslaved in that process. So really it's time to remove that kind of link between those two, and that migrant workers should come to the UK like any other job-seeking people who will apply to the job, give all the credentials they have, their educational qualification, the experience, and an interview. That should be enough. And then an offer of the job should be given as a person directly being interviewed by an employer to an employee, and that the visa should not be linked to that employer. So that anytime an employer abuses that worker, you could just say, I'm walking away from this employment, I can find another job and I can apply to another job, and that I don't fear about my visa being lost, yeah? And that I don't have to pay all this cost. Because even if you can move from one employer to another, that costs a lot of money too at the moment. It costs you the same amount of money that you spend from when you seek, employment from back home, moving to another employer here, if you can manage to do that within the kind of restricted, I think, 30 days or 60 days, something like that, to be able to find another employer. Of course, your employer will not give you a reference, would they? You move to another employer. So all those kinds of things are so oppressive to many workers. It's not fair. There's no kind of fairness in that process of job seeking. We are all workers. We apply for a job, and we should be allowed to apply for a job without all the kind of burden and restrictions that's put upon us as workers, and to be able to move from one employer to another without the fear of reprisal from the employer and the fear of being kicked out of the country as a migrant, because that is really allowing employers to enslave workers and to abuse them and to exploit them. So we have to remove all those things, because these are barriers, and these affect a lot of our ability to perform properly sometimes, our mental health, our ability to integrate properly, because even then, during this period of these processes, you cannot live a normal life. You just have to think, I have to work, I have to pass this, I have to take this test, I have to pass it, I have to work, I have to take on more shifts so that I can send money back home to pay for my debts and all that kind of. Imagine living that for at least 3 to 4 years of your life, if you're lucky to be able to have done all your responsibility within that period, maybe even longer sometimes. But the system that is imposed upon these workers are really oppressive, and it needs to be removed. I think several things that the NHS can do. One, they really have to think about the way in which they train, if you like, the managers, the people looking after the workers, in terms of their own unconscious biases. The kind of institutional racism within the NHS is very much felt by our workers. I know that in the last how many years of having so many Filipino nurses in the NHS, only about 7, 8, 9, maybe less than 10 Filipino nurses are in the Band 8 or Band 9 of the NHS. Can you imagine that? With so many Filipino nurses there, nobody can even promote themselves to a higher level of decision-making positions. So that's really telling. It's not because I think we're stupid and we cannot do the work, right? It's because we're looked upon as brown people and thinking, oh, they're kind of, low-educated people. They can't speak English properly. They have to be tested English. Before they come here. And even then, your English test will expire, right? When you come here. It's like when you come here, you lose the ability to speak English, so your English kind of test expires. But anyway, I think that the NHS should think through how they can ensure that they treat the workers fairly, regardless of their color, their ethnicity, or whatever country they come from. Because there is a continuing discrimination within the NHS against black and brown people at the moment who are working there. And you can see it institutionally. Many of black and brown people are working in the lower paid grade. And that's what, that's the data of the NHS RES, right? The Workforce Relations Quality Service. So they know that, and they keep on saying, how do we bring them up? I mean, really, at the end of the day, get rid of all those kinds of institutional barriers that they're putting upon them. That's why they're like that. So that's one thing that they have to think about very, very seriously. And it's a lot of massive education or re-education or relearning, whatever you call it, with many people that make decisions on those level of looking after workers. On the other hand, they're also colluding with the government hostile environment policy against migrants. If they're accepting the fact that many of the nurses coming here are not good enough, and that the imposition of all these immigration policies is being accepted by the NHS, then they're colluding with that kind of institutional racism, because they have to say, the NHS have to say, these are workers, we've interviewed them, we've seen their credentials, they have experience working as nurses. Why do they have to go through all these hoops? And we've said this to a degree to the NMC. I mean, the NMC is probably, to a degree, also proliferating this institutional racism, because the whole caboodle about before a few years ago, they will require non-EU nurses to pass IELTS 7 for their test, but they will not require the European nurses to pass IELTS 7 at all, right? And so where's the fairness there? And you know, I have nothing against having a certain level of English, because you need that in your work. That is needed, but not that punishing IELTS 7. I mean, between you and me, I'll probably not pass it, right, if I have to take the test. And I've lived there for 20 years of my life. I'm sure I'll never pass that as a migrant worker who didn't grow up and got educated here. So what's fair there? That's really discrimination. That's really racism, you know. And then when we lobbied against that, they said, oh, okay, everybody will now take the IELTS 11. So they said, well, no, that's not what we're asking you to do. It's asking you to remove it and have a better, you know, English, because they're not going to write a, you know, master's degree essay in their work in the hospital, you know. So, but the NHS is colluding, and the NMC is putting that kind of restriction to the nurses here, and we've asked the NMC to do that. When the NMC introduced this OSCE system, which the NHS readily agreed, my God, how many institutional training organizations pop up suddenly in order to train them and to test them, and it costs 1,000 a pop to, you know, to take that OSCE test. I mean, seriously, really, why? We can't understand why, you know. They have to be trained, of course, to understand the new setting in their working environment, which might slightly be different, you know, to a hospital where they work in their country of origin, the Philippines. But I have to tell you, the hospital in the Philippines, especially, of course, because we're mainly private hospitals, are state-of-the-art kind of technology, because they're private hospitals with all the technology. And so, therefore, you know, the ability to adapt from there to here is not going to be difficult, right? The ability to understand terminologies that they use, you know, whatever American English we have, to adapt it to British English is not going to be difficult. And it doesn't need testing, you know. But, hey, they put all of those, and the institutions like the NHS, the NMC, the Home Office, all colluded to say, yes, we put this there, and therefore it will create a lot of money and industry, testing and, you know, training and all that kind of stuff within the UK, punishing the workers. How fair is that? I think many, because of our experience with the COVID and the pandemic and all the kind of information workshops, you know, engagement that we have with many of our health workers, encouraging them to speak out, encouraging them to understand their rights, to be able to speak out and protect themselves as they protect their, you know, patients. Some of them are starting to speak out, but it's also very difficult consequences when they speak out, because when they speak out and they start fighting the institution, such as an NHS, it's very difficult. You know, some people go to court, went to court for what they think is the experience of discrimination or bullying, as they would always refer it to their manager. And again, that really takes a big toll on their mental health and their physical health. Some of them just says they can't go back to the hospital anymore. You know, they reach a point when they're completely damaged and they cannot go back to the work, the same place where they really love to work because of the work that they're doing. But yeah, that is really damaging. And I think when other people see that, other people get kind of dissuaded from, speaking out. But we have tried, as a community, as an organization, we tried to help them understand through that, if only to support also their kind of mental health situation, and the fact that they know that, the community organizations is able to support them. I think that strengthens them, and that makes them feel that they're not on their own and feeling isolated, and that we managed to get people together who have experienced similar things. And now I am involved in a group of nurses in the NHS who are trying to influence the NHS in thinking through the different ways in which at least Filipino workers can be supported and protected within the NHS. How far that will go within the whole big institution of the NHS, I don't know. But we can only start small, and then hopefully it will grow.